Happy Saturday. Welcome to the Marketing Madmen. Trip Job and Nick Constantino here, live from the Battery. And Nick, we are going to talk about life, business. I mean, we got it all, I think, today.
Yeah, and we're just gonna hit it running because the dude that we're about to interview and have on the show has climbed a bunch of mountains and has been in planes and gone fast, and so we're just gonna hit this thing running as fast as we can. So to do that, I'm gonna introduce Andy Christiansen. Andy, how you doing, bud?
That's great. Best intro I think I've ever had. Big mountains, big planes, fast.
We got to set it up. We got to set it up, right? So I have on here a motivational speaker, a TED Talk speaker, how to motivate, and a host of a Tenacious Podcast. And if you're calling it a Tenacious Podcast, there's a reason behind it. So that's all those setups. We're good to go. So give us I just said all the things you are now. Get us up to speed on how you got there.
It's my greatest trait, being tenacious, because I grew up a blue-collar kid in Cleveland, Ohio.
Oh, I'm sorry.
By a single dad, and it was really like being raised by wolves, and I had to figure it out on my own. It was catch as catch can, and I realized that if I worked hard at 11, I started my first business, cutting grass. Then I rigged leaves. Then I shoveled snow. Then I learned how to paint houses. And there's other things that weren't legal I won't mention, but I learned how to make money and make things happen. And that's been my trait in business. Yeah. And along the way, I got a college degree somehow, bunch of certifications, wrote a book after flunking English in college. So again, tenacious. I just get in there and I make things work.
Yeah, love it. So military background?
To some degree. I wrote the book that you have in your hand called The 40-40 Principle. And a guy in the military invited me to England, an American base over there, Mildenhall, to come speak. And that started this love affair that we both had with leadership.
Cool.
Then he moved to the States. We created this leadership course together. Cool. I teach it separately. He teaches it at the Air Force. And I've been adjunct professor of leadership at the Air Force for about 15 years.
Yeah, so that's military adjacent, but you actually probably see it from a completely different perspective because you get to see it from the outside looking in, and not many people are granted that opportunity. It's usually you only see it from the inside out, so that's got to be unique for you.
I'm one of 1% of civilians that have been in a fighter jet, a T-38 trainer jet.
Nice.
That's cool. Mach speeds.
That's cool. So we're going to go Mach speed. Yeah. All right. So look, TED Talks, all these things, they have become such a part of nomenclature. You looked on LinkedIn, everyone's doing a TED. There's so much stuff going on all the time. Talk a little bit about right now what your day-to-day is. Talk about what you do to motivate, who you speak in front of, how these things are being booked, because I think we're going to open up to a lot of conversations of when you need to find someone like Andy. If you want to be a speaker, here's how you do it. I think this is just going to pave the course for a lot of different conversations.
Yeah, it's a longer story than I'm going to give it for obvious reasons, but I started out in college as a finance guy. I'm a business guy. Like I said, I started my first business when I was a teenager, and I thought I wanted to go make millions of dollars. And at some point after I launched a product called Fruit 2.0 from a company called Very Fine, we sold it to Kraft. It was the first fruit-flavored, no-calorie water. So spring water with Splenda.
Gotcha.
I couldn't believe no one had invented it, but we did. We sold the company. At that point, I was 37. I realized, I don't know if I got hit on my head somewhere that year, but I departed from business, so to speak, to I wanted to help people. I just woke up one day and I said, that's what I want to do with the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And I started meeting with people in coffee shops, and I would ask them questions about what they wanted to do with their life. And they said, can we do this again? I'm like, this was really helpful to you? I thought I was the only guy interested in this.
Well, you said in your intro, you make things happen and you make money. Well, sometimes they're not the same. Sometimes making things happen isn't necessarily about the money.
And maybe it's just people need someone to ask them the questions so they can come up with the right answers, which is what I've found really is what a coach does.
Yeah.
You're not a consultant coming in with the best idea. You're asking that person what's their best idea, because no one's generally listening.
Yeah.
We're all so busy talking.
That's the best salesperson. That's the best anything in business is you want to get, now sometimes you can add influence to get someone to the answer you want them to get to, but ultimately what you're trying to do is guide somebody. And it's funny, and I think the biggest problem, I met so many motivational speakers and business coaches. A lot of times you meet them and the first thought is, all you are is a shrink to a guy that can't admit he needs help, like, don't call yourself a business coach. Like, you're just laying him down on the couch and listening to him, and he's paying you an exorbitant amount of money to do so. So I think that there's a fine line between, and look, the point is that I think we've gotten to a point now where everyone on LinkedIn is giving advice. You go on Instagram, and it's a million people that are trying to give you advice, and then you start reading their resumes and like, who am I taking advice from? What is this? You went through it. You sold a business. You know, I like how you glanced over the illicit activities that made money. You know what? That's the people I want to hire. You know, you did those things. You know how to run numbers and keep it away from the cops. That's probably a skill set in there. That's something that's a benefit to me in my career and everybody else around them. You know, don't do it in the building, but what you do at home is none of my business. So I think one of the reasons that people gravitate towards you is besides authenticity, besides the fact that you're tenacious, you are probably the manifestation of what they wished they could be in themselves, but either couldn't when they were young, or they just want to be that because that's what people think of themselves as, right? I had a similar upbringing. I was one of 4 boys, but like I remember at 9 years old driving my bike in Queens to go get pizza down the block in Queens. Like, you know, the murder rate in Queens in the 90s? I didn't know there was a murder rate. I knew they had a bunch of Korean friends and that the gangs they were affiliated with would protect me. 9 years old.
But if you look like you own the place, they let you buy.
Exactly. You look like you own the place and you don't do stupid stuff.
Yeah.
You don't need to be making eye contact with people. Walk by, head on a swivel, do your thing. No one will ever bother you. They look for targets. As long as you are confident in your steps, no one's going to look at you as a target. They're going to look at you as, wait, what's this guy doing here? Which is a better thing. Anyway, okay. We went very, very fast. Okay. So what I want to talk about now, one of the things that has really come up that you have put some time in is scaling. Okay, so when we talk about business,
right?
When we talk about, it seems to me, and Tripp, you can probably chime in here, that business tends to be really good at the 1 million to about the 20, 25 million range. That's where one person can do it. They can hire a staff of people they trust, maybe even 30, 35.
I think the stats are such that very few make it from 1 to 10. I think that 8, 9 is kind of a threshold. I think if you get to 10, actually from there, I think they tend to go more. That seems to be a
then let's talk about that 10 to 25 range.
Yeah.
Let's just give that so we have some numbers on it. That 10 to 25 range. Everybody, that's a lot of the advice you're giving now. That's a lot of this, guys, is scaling. How do you scale your business? How do you put people in place? So talk about in your career how you found out that's something that you wanted that you could help people with. Obviously, you did it with your own company. You scaled it to a point where it was going to be sold. But talk about how you get to that point and when you realize that it's something that you're going to need help with.
Yeah, I've got a line that I love, which is every 4 years, you're a freshman again. And I think senioritis, and you can have senioritis at any age in life.
Yeah, I had it as a junior and a senior.
Not just school years, you know. And I think the biggest problem that I see, the biggest problem I do see is senioritis. A person starts a business, they get some degree of success, and then call them a senior, and they believe that if they just hit rinse and repeat for how they got there.
They put it in autopilot.
They do, and they wonder why they stagnate. And let's call it 1 to 5 million or 5 to 10. I about every 5 million, I see this happen. You're a freshman again. And something needs to change. Phil Knight, the #1 quote on his mantra list is, our business is always changing.
Yeah.
Phil Knight, Nike.
Yeah.
And that is the biggest lesson I don't think people learn.
Yeah.
They stay the same.
Yeah, and I think you even have the case studies, right, of your Kodaks and your Xeroxes and your Blockbusters and these chains that ran on autopilot. And look, let's not be fools here. They made so much money, right? Even if the company went bankrupt, the executives and all the people with stakes in that made a lot of money over that time frame. It's always the lowest level investors that end up getting screwed in the end, that kind of hitch their wagon at the wrong time. But again, I think this is going to bring me to the next thing, and I think I want to spend the next segment talking about this, but let me set it up. I think one of the problems is that we talk about emotional intelligence and self-awareness, and we go into such depth in it, but the more successful you are, the actually harder it is to have self-awareness, because what you like doing is you like starting to the smell of your own farts. And I know that, but it's a graphic statement, but when you start thinking you're so good, and you have to an extent be in business, it's hard to really prospectively look at things, and I think that's where a lot of the flaw is. So I think we're going to talk the next segment about scaling, about emotional intelligence, about your self-awareness that allows you to realize that you need help. But what do you think the biggest blockade is? If you had to pick one thing, obviously autopilot, but that stops people from pushing forward. Is it just complacency with where they are? Is it just they close the circle so they don't have any confidants that are telling them to grow? What do you think the biggest factor in that complacency is?
Army of one. I am my own solution. I see it all the time. I will not mention the specific name of the company, but they're the largest chicken retail restaurant chain in the country. And they are some of the best at this. In fact, the owners, the franchisees of those restaurants, if they are in the store every day of the week, they're not successful. The most successful ones are rarely ever there because they have duplicated themselves. They have found a way to get a general manager in there that is as good, if not better than them at running the business. And I think that's the solution. I believe that's the solution, is you've got to delegate is the simple way of putting it. But nowadays, you can't really find enough people to delegate to. You have to learn to coach them up.
Yeah.
So the business owner of today has to bring someone in and realize they either need to hire someone to coach them leadership skills or coach them themselves, apprentice them. We used to have apprentices.
Yeah. But in most cases, and especially if this is their first business, that's what they did. They became the business. They ran the business, and they don't know how to do something differently, correct?
That's their wheelhouse. They're good at it, or they wouldn't have gotten to where they are. But the hardest lesson to learn is, it's like having children. You have to treat them one way when they're infants, another way when they're young, another way when they're teenagers, and then an entirely different way when they're adults. And if you don't evolve, and that's really what a business owner needs to do, you're going to be stuck.
Yeah.
Do you ever see instances where a business owner realizes they need someone, they probably can't do it, and they actually bring someone in to be that operational arm, and they do what they do?
Oh, yeah. Those are the smart ones. And that's where we need to go, is how do you get there?
Yeah.
And that's humility, and that's having emotional intelligence, being able to pull back and delegate and say, hey, I'm not the entire solution.
Yeah, and I think in my interactions with business owners, and we tend to be that 8 to 20 million range. The biggest problem is the ego involved in being a business owner, because for a while when you're scaling that business from 0 to 10 million, you have to be the boss. You have to make decisions. That's what gets you there. But then when the point when you get there, it is very hard, one, to share the knowledge you've learned in a way that's not condescending, and two, to take somebody else in with an external perspective and say, come teach me. And I think that's the problem, is there's a person who's built for 0 to 10 million. There's probably a person who's built for 10 to 30 million, and then there's probably a person built for 30 million plus. But that's not what we're teaching people. We're teaching people just keep growing. Keep growing. It's good for the economy. It's good for those around you. So when we get back from the break, we're going to dive in on that. But I think that's a great intro. We covered a lot really fast, but I think it's the way to do it. You've been listening to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3, and we'll be right back.